you guys have really accomplished just about all of the algebra topics that we really want to look at. In fact, the radicals and the rational expressions, that tends to be one of the more challenging pieces. There's other parts of math that we need to kind of move into, and we're going to start with the Pythagorean Theorem, which talks about right triangles. It doesn't matter which leg you put as A or which leg you put as B. The fact is that you have two legs that are A and B. The hypotenuse is called C. Does anybody know what the Pythagorean Theorem says? Very good. Or as Jim Haney says, A squared plus B squared equals toilet paper. So, for those of you who are taking second semester with me, we are taking a course during third quarter called trigonometry. All of trigonometry comes from the Pythagorean Theorem. All of it. Yeah, you can. All right, here we go. So use the Pythagorean Theorem to determine the following. So we label this as C because that's the hypotenuse. We have two sides, 5 and 10. And so we write 5 squared plus 10 squared is equal to C squared. $25 plus 100 is equal to C squared. Or 125 is equal to C squared. So, can you reduce the square root of 125? What does it reduce to? Square root of 25 times the root of 5. Or 5 roots of 5 is equal to C. So, you're going to list it both as a radical and simplest form, but you're also going to list it as a decimal. So the square root of 125, we're at 11.18. Yep. So you're going to list both. And that way I can see 11.18, that's longer than 5 and 10. So that would make sense, it's the longest side. This one, it doesn't matter whether you call it A or B, I'm going to call that side B. So which side would be A? So 6 squared plus B squared is equal to 13 squared. 6 squared is 36 plus B squared is 169. Subtract that 36 and we get B squared is equal to 133. Is there a perfect square that divides evenly into 133? So we just have rid of 133. I go to my calculator. Hopefully I'll come up with a value somewhere between 6 and 13, it looks like. 11.53. And number 3. Call that A. Doesn't matter whether you call it A or B. The most important part is just to get C correct. So it's A squared plus 13 squared is equal to 15 squared. Or A squared plus 169 is equal to 225. $225 minus 169. And I get 56. Is there a perfect square that divides evenly into 56? 4 goes in 14 times. So A is equal to 2 roots of 14. What's that? And if we take the square root of 56, we get 7.48. So let's check this out. It says an 18-foot ladder is leaning against a building. So I have a building. My building has a door. and a window. And I got a ladder that leans against it. It says that the ladder, 18 feet tall, 18-foot ladder, excuse me. On the bottom of the ladder is 6 feet away from the base of the building. How far up the wall does the ladder reach? I'll use an H for height. I use H as my variable. So to find H, I simply set up 6 squared plus H squared is equal to 18 squared. For 36 plus H squared is 324. What to do? Subtract that 36, H squared is 288. Now, do you think that the person in this situation is going to want the answer as like 2 roots of 14, or do you think they're going to want a decimal? They're going to want a decimal, right? So in this type of problem on the test, I'd say, please leave your answer as a decimal. When you square up both sides, you get H is equal to 16.97 feet. Two more formulas. Distance formula. Distance is equal to the square root of x sub 2 minus x sub 1, quantity squared, plus y sub 2 minus y sub 1, quantity squared. Right here. So something I want you guys to notice is that this formula here, we didn't just make it up. Watch what happens if I square both sides. If I square d, I get d squared. And if I square this thing with the square root, what happens to the square root? And I get x sub 2 minus x sub 1 squared plus y sub 2 minus y sub 1 squared. Does that look familiar? What does it look like? A squared, B squared, C squared. Isn't that just what it is? This thing squared plus that thing squared is that squared? Isn't that all it is? Turns out that the distance formula is just the Pythagorean theorem. I'm going to show you how to work it out. Suppose you wanted to find the distance between these 2 points here, the distance between those 2 points. Instead of using the distance formula, you could just use the Pythagorean theorem, which they're the same things. Notice how I just make a triangle. What is the length of this side of the triangle? 4. What's the length of this side? 6. And we would like to find the distance. The hypotenuse. So 4 squared plus 6 squared is equal to d squared. Or 16 plus 36 is equal to d squared. Or 52 is equal to d squared. Is there a perfect square that divides evenly into 52? 4 goes in 13 times. So I get 2 roots of 13 is equal to d. Remember, Cherry, you said that it is what as a decimal? 7.2. I'd like to see both. I just want to see both. That way you could compare the 7.2 to both of these. You can see that it's longer. It's hard to tell that that's longer than 4 or 6. See what I'm saying? Suppose it wasn't in that form and it gave you the 2 coordinates. Okay, I'll write it again. Distance is equal to the square root of x sub 2 minus x sub 1 squared, y sub 2 minus y sub 1 squared. So, what do I have as my x values? What do I have as my y values? Yep.
Just have parents, just an update for parents.
This is x1, this is y1. That's my first coordinate, x and y values. This is x2, this is y2. So I've got x2 minus x1. So what's that going to be? Negative 1 minus 3 squared. Plus negative 3 minus negative 2. Yep, so that's what we've got to work out. What's negative 3 minus, or negative 1 minus 3? Squared? 16. And then minus a negative, I add the opposite. Negative 1 squared is 1. So distance is equal to the square root of 17. So you should be able to find the distance between 2 points by looking at the graph, or you should be able to do it by using the distance formula. That's the complicated formula. Can I give you the easy one? Okay. Sophie, suppose that you got a 10 out of 10 on one test and an 8 out of 10 on another test. What would be your average? What do you guys think? 10 out of 10 on one,
9 out of 10.
8 out of 10 on another. You got 9. 9's right in the middle, right? And what you can do is you just take that 8 and that 10 and add it together to get 18, and then divide it by 2, right? So the other thing we want to find is the midpoint formula. And in order to do midpoint, all we're going to do is take the x values and add them together. And that gives us our x coordinate for a midpoint between 2 points. And then in order to find the y value, we take y1 plus y2 and we divide it by 2. And that gives us the y value. So let's look at this first example right here. What's this coordinate? Name it. Good. Negative 1, negative 3. What is that coordinate? 2, 5. So when we find the midpoint, we add the x values and divide by 2, and we add the y values divide by 2. What do you get if you add the x values? Two plus negative 1 divided by 2 would be 1 over 2. And then we have 5 plus negative 3 divided by 2. And 5 plus negative 3 is 2, divided by 2 is 1. If I were to plot 1/2, 1, does that look like it's between those 2 points? Does it look like it's in the middle? I would say it looks like it's spot on. Suppose you weren't given the picture and you're just given the coordinates, and we want to find the midpoint. Again, you just add the x values and divide by 2, add the y values, divide by 2. What do you get if you add the x values? 6. You divide by 2 to get 3. Add the y values, what do you get? Yep, and so that just stays negative 3 halves. And that's that. Good job, y'all.